Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this latest episode of Korn Ferry Live. Great to have you here with us, especially this time of year. I know calendars are full, inboxes are noisy, and a lot of us are already mentally halfway into the holidays. So generally, thank you for spending this time with us today. We really appreciate it. And whether you're joining live, sneaking this in between meetings, or catching the replay with a cup of coffee later, everybody is welcome. So please share this with everyone you know. Today's conversation feels like a really appropriate one. As we head toward the end of the year, many of us are reflecting on what really worked in hiring, what didn't, what we need to get right in 2026. So this is a chance to pause, look ahead, and talk about the skills that truly matter, the human ones, and how we actually spot them in the people we hire. Oh dear. Let's have a quick virtual show of hands. How many of you have heard people saying, we just need to hire people who are good at AI? Or maybe you've heard, who are our go-to AI people? Sound familiar? Now, here's the twist. When we asked talent leaders what they actually need for 2026, AI fluency didn't top the list. Critical thinking and problem solving did by a country mile, which raises an awkward little question for us all who are hiring right now. If these are the skills that matter most, why are they the hardest ones to spot in an interview? Because everyone's saying they're a great problem solver. Everyone claims to think strategically, and yet we've all hired that person who's brilliant on paper and then froze the moment things got messy. That's what today is all about. Not how to compete with AI, how to hire for what AI can't do. How to actually assess critical thinking, judgment and problem solving in real humans, in real hiring situations, without relying on gut feel. So if you're going to be hiring in 2026, or maybe you're hiring in the next week, you're in the right place. And of course, I want you to get involved. I have guests and they're here to answer your questions. And we've all got lots of questions. So get them in the chat. This is your chance to have a mini one-to-one with our experts. Great opportunity. Grab it by the horns. Please don't be shy of your reaction buttons. Thumbs up, good point, insightful. Give them all a real workout. It just really helps us gauge what's landing and what you want us to talk about next. Right. I'm your host, Darren Bolton, Chief Creative Officer here at Korn Ferry. And today I'm joined by Michelle Capra, Senior Client Partner and Vice President of Korn Ferry RPO, and Priscilla Oley, Korn Ferry Senior Solution Architect. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Darren.
Lovely to see you both here today. And just to get our viewers warmed up, as they can sometimes be a little bit shy at times, so I've got a little question for them. So for all of you out there, just want to know, what's the one word that best describes how you're feeling right now? The holiday's close, time's running out before the team all heads out. Maybe you're feeling tired, maybe you're feeling relieved, excited. Put your word in the chat and maybe we can have a look at those a little bit later. I just want one word. I never ask for too much from you. You know what I'm like. I just want to know you're out there and we're not here all on our own, just the three of us. So we'll look a bit at those a little bit later. And how about a little quick icebreaker for my lovely guests? Because I like to keep you on your toes as well. So Priscilla, Michelle, I want to know what your holiday superpower is. I'll give you a few seconds to think. I'll give you mine first. You've got a little bit of time. Roll it around in your head. So mine is probably, I'm the games master. So I make and create and lead all the games we play over the Christmas period. I'm never sure how much people actually enjoy them, but I have lots of fun. I've become a bit of a games bully almost, making sure everyone gets involved, and it makes sure it keeps everyone awake. So that's my superpower. So Priscilla, what's yours?
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think a lot of people tend to overcomplicate the holidays. I don't know if it's a superpower, but I keep things really simple. We reduce the amount of gifts we're trying to buy for people, keep it kids only. If people offer to host, let them host. I'd like to keep things simple so I can take a minute and breathe.
I love that. Simplifying it would be brilliant. It almost seems impossible, but I love that. That is a superpower, trust me. Michelle?
I think for me, it's definitely present wrapping. So whether I'm wrapping or using bags in the 11th hour right before the holiday, I'm getting it done one way or another. So I definitely think that is my superpower. And I'm sure a lot of others are feeling that pressure as we approach it in 9 days, right? For Christmas.
I know, it's not far. If it's squares, Sharp edges, I'm fine. Anything out of that, then wrapping is just, oh my goodness, I have to try and make sure I grab those ones first if we're sharing the wrapping and stuff. But another good superpower, thanks for that. So, okay, enough of the holiday fun. Let's get down to business. So, Michelle, let's start with you, if I may. When you looked at the data, what surprised you most about the skills that kind of rose to the top? And why do you think very human skills like critical thinking and adaptability are pulling so far ahead of AI skills for 2026?
Yeah. And Darren, I think it's so interesting to think about this because as we look across our businesses and the clients we're supporting, we're talking about AI every single day and it's top of mind. So it's nice to step back and say, the human element is so important to what we're doing day to day and how we strategize for the future and look ahead to problem solve. So I do think these tactics and strategies and skills that came to the top of the list, right? So we're seeing problem solving, critical thinking, we're seeing adaptability and collaboration, leadership. These are fundamentals. These things are not going away. No matter how much AI is embedded into our processes, in order to use AI effectively, you have to be a strong problem solver. You have to look at ways to create parallels to what you're seeing within AI. More than just the gut check, right? So you're looking at AI and using it as a tool within your toolkit to be forward thinking for what's coming next. What technology is on the forefront 5 years from now, right? There's so many things that we need to be thinking about from a critical standpoint. And I think what's so important for our teams and the clients we support and lead is it's not just a one-stop shop where you can type something in and get an answer and a response. You have to be thinking about what you do with that response, how you build it amongst your team, how you collaborate with, your peers, with leadership, what you bring to the C-suite in order for them to understand the value of the proposition that you're looking at as well. So I do think, that a lot of organizations are more leaning towards that now because it is in fact what it will get you ahead. You need to be AI fluent, but you also need to have these skills that are fundamental to long-term success.
Absolutely, yeah. And Priscilla, what conversation should this data be forcing at the leadership table about talent strategy for next year?
Yeah, so I would say in general, what we're seeing as far as skills being a focus for talent strategy. If you're wondering, should that be a focus for us? We are seeing that as something that organizations that we're talking to are really putting as a focus for this year, next year. Our own research even also actually underscores this too. What we're seeing is that organizations that do focus on it, as far as like the why should we focus on skills? They're much more likely to respond effectively to change. We see that when people who work cross-functionally and the people within those groups bring different skill sets to the table, we see innovation and problem solving really increase, which makes sense. They're bringing fresh perspectives, unique thinking to the table. So it is really important to think about skills, but it's helpful to think as far as strategically how to categorize skills in different ways, first of all. So I think Michelle was touching upon this, but certainly there are what we call perishable skills. Those are being, short-term, they're outdated quickly. Think coding in a specific language. AI actually fits here because it changes, so quickly. Then there's semi-durable skills. So those maybe last, several years. They may evolve a little bit, but think about, people who know how to use specific frameworks or methodologies in certain ways. And then I would say like the third category would be, as Michelle mentioned, longer term durable skills. Those are really useful for applying across different contexts, things like what we were talking about, collaboration, communication, critical thinking. Even just last week, for example, I was talking to a client who, one of their focuses for succession planning for their critical general manager roles is, something that they're focusing on because they have a need to build a stronger pipeline for leaders who are ready now to step into those roles. And they can struggle with that, but their focus in that plan for what to measure, what to develop are actually the more durable long-term skills because they're harder to develop. they're hard to find, versus, more tactical AI type, technical skills can be trained more easily. So think about what categories there are of skills, but importantly for talent strategy then is thinking about identifying what are those high impact capabilities that you specifically need based on your business strategy. And it's going to look different from company to company. We see this with organizations that we work with. And how you start thinking about that is focus on what is the work that has to get done. So less about, what are the top skills? What are the, skills we're seeing in the marketplace? It's what do you need for work to get done? And then you align the skills to that. And based on that, how do you then effectively determine where those talent gaps are? Because then that informs your thinking process for, do we need to buy talent because we need a quick need to fill for a specific capability? Certainly, borrowing talent could be a strategy for certain areas, maybe specific projects and a short-term focus with interim hires. Then building capabilities. So what can you offer for development? And then, lastly, yes, AI and tech and automation can serve a purpose and does have a place to fit in your talent strategy there too. So there's certain ways to think about that.
That's great. That's great. I had forgotten, but we do actually have a poll for our lovely viewers out there. So I'm hoping we can get the poll up on the screen. Is that possible, team? Oh my goodness, it's so slick. Okay, so we want to know, which of these skills do you find hardest to assess for? And we want to keep it really simple. As usual, just put it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. Feel free to put a couple of letters if you think there's two of them that really kind of tick your area at the moment and stuff. And we'll hopefully look at the answer stat a little bit later, nearer the end of the session. So that should all be in the chat. So you can refer back to that if that's all working. But please have a look at those in your own time. Right, so Priscilla, when you're actually in an interview, candidate sounds confident, their experience all lines up and they're answering fluently. How do you tell whether you're seeing real critical thinking in action versus someone who's just really well prepared? What does strong critical thinking look and sound like in that moment?
Yeah, it's important. I think also importantly, it's to ask the right questions. So you're going to get the right level of evidence that you need to be able to analyze that. So you'll want to ask your candidates to walk you through how they've approached complex problems, right? So how do they break down ambiguous situations? How do they, validate information that they're getting from different sources? How do they make decisions, especially when there might be contradictory information to manage? That happens to us a lot. So ask them these types of questions, and then their responses should indicate things like, they don't jump to conclusions right away. They're going to ask you some clarifying questions, or they're maybe telling a story about an event in the past where they asked clarifying questions to demonstrate that they're thinking through, am I understanding the situation well? What constraints are they working with? There might be some assumptions that they're making and taking into account in that process. Importantly, they're going to be telling you the why of their approach in that scenario. So they have to show that logical thought process that's going to take into account cause and effect, weighing pros and cons. What are the risks that they've thought through that might fall into their decision-making process? Those kinds of attributes.
And kind of what red and green flags should we, or they look out for when assessing adaptability and a learning mindset?
Yeah, certainly and actually, those are some of the harder to develop competencies. We've done a lot of research at Korn Ferry around, what's easier to develop, what's harder. Those are very hard to develop. But the key, I would say here, is getting to understand how the person responds to change, how they respond to getting feedback. That's sometimes hard to get for anyone at work or personal too, and dealing again with, uncertain situations. So interestingly, actually here too, with adaptability and learning, EI, so emotional regulation, is really foundational. If you think about it, it's really hard for us to change our thinking and change our processes when we're sort of busy protecting our ego, if we feel like we're managing what might be perceived as a threat scenario. And that sounds really, intense, but actually getting feedback and asking to change your approach, can be difficult to take in. So it requires some openness. So certainly then red flags to, identifying adaptability and learning mindset would be behaving too much in one way or having an emphasis on consistency in approach in every scenario. Speaking of feedback, they might accept feedback well, but do they show that they can apply the feedback and make changes going forward? That could be a red flag if they haven't actually made the changes. Some green flags, a really good green flag would actually be proactively foreseeing, I think Michelle mentioned this earlier too, foreseeing what changes will be needed and making adjustments even before, you're being asked to. In group dynamics, it's really important too, being able to sort of pick up on situational cues and adapting your approach that way. Those are some flags to look for.
Yeah. And if we shift that lens to sort of collaboration and leadership, what are the early signals that tell you someone will work well with others or lead effectively, especially when things aren't always straightforward? Are there any sort of signs we should look out for there?
Yeah, definitely. So certainly with collaboration, this is all about building partnerships, being able to work with others towards specifically shared goals. And so green flags would look like, showing how do they take into account others' interests as well as their own in decision-making and taking actions. Are they partnering across silos to get work done? Do they give credit to others in wins? I think that's really important to show too. Some watch outs or red flags could be that they actually put their own interests first, especially when you're working in more matrix organizations where, collaborative work needs to get done for a larger goal. Being able to put others' interests is really important. That they maybe show poor communication skills between groups. And then sometimes you often see that people like to work alone because you can work faster in the short term alone. So oftentimes that's a red flag as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I do see a question. So we're having a problem with showing our questions on screen apparently. But I can see them in my other box. We've got a question here. Oh, maybe this is going to come up. I believe this is from Murdad. Sorry if the pronunciation, I've got that wrong. How do you assess critical thinking and problem solving in practice? So we've kind of done a little bit of that, but I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit more. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. And I think a lot of the things that Priscilla, you had mentioned, right, lean into this. So understanding how to give somebody a really thoughtful question that they need to peel apart and that's ambiguous in nature, to understand how they look at that question, how they piece together the puzzle of what they're trying to solve for versus one straight answer or consistent patterns of answers. It's really looking at each piece of a puzzle, I would say, and looking at the layers of that to be able to jump into that question in detail. So I do think it's really important what we're seeing across our client groups is looking at the way that we're asking questions of candidates and taking those questions a step further and asking for more details so that we're not just getting one straight answer and really being able to peel back that onion.
Yeah.
And to build, I'll just quickly to build on that too. If you have more time beyond an interview to go deep with someone towards the end stages of the process, a lot of times, certainly, case study scenario type situations where you're putting someone in a live scenario where they have to demonstrate how do they approach the situation, then you're being able to evaluate them in real time versus asking them a past event. So that can be another level of evidence you can gather too.
Great. Michelle, when AI is doing kind of like more of the heavy lifting, it's getting harder to see how people kind of think for themselves almost. In a hiring process, how do you spot candidates who can work confidently with AI without relying on it to do the thinking for them? Is there anything we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what we need to think about is everybody wants AI to be at the forefront of their process. But how do we evaluate and look at ways that candidates can really be using it effectively, but also be the ones that are critically thinking and problem solving? So again, I think it goes back to some of what we discussed, but also if we're looking at assessments, having time constraints on assessments, looking at ways to make sure that individuals are actually thinking through the logic of what is being asked, and having those difficult questions being asked of them that are outside of just a pattern of questions. So that's what we're seeing our clients leaning in more on, as well as we're looking at patterns. We're looking at consistent time constraints. We're looking at doubling down on in-person meetings, right? We're seeing that come back even with interviews, having them in person versus virtual. So I think, AI is a very critical portion of what clients are needing to do to get ahead, but also at the same token, we want to make sure that the skills of the candidates will be there to solution for what's coming next.
Okay, great. And I can see some questions popping up, so that's great, but I just want to ask you, Priscilla, this question first.
Yep.
I want us to get kind of really practical for the next question. When you talk about thinking style, how do you actually measure that? What kinds of assessments help you see how someone thinks rather than just what they know?
Yeah, it's actually a more complex question than it might be, you might think. So because a lot goes into your thinking style, as far as different factors. Certainly at the outset, there are behavioral-based assessments that can measure the more observable aspects. So things like we just discussed earlier, collaboration, adaptability. There's online assessments that can measure this, but you have to watch the format to make sure that, it doesn't allow them to kind of fake good throughout, which is a very natural tendency for us to present ourselves positively. But certainly online behavioral-based assessments can be really good. You capture a lot of information very quickly, or interviews, as Michelle was talking about as well. That can be useful for the behavioral aspect of your thinking style. But actually also cognitive ability comes into play too with your thinking style, because it's looking at how do you use kind of your raw problem-solving capacity to make sense of complex information quickly, as Michelle mentioned, under time pressure. So there's, examples of these: numerical tests, logic tests, verbal reasoning tests, especially if the role itself is, very analytically heavy, the load of the work being done. And then just to get even further down, so thinking style is also heavily influenced by the kind of sort of person that you are. So your personality at work, what motivates you, those are more innate aspects of you that indicate, are you going to focus on certain aspects or put effort into certain areas more because your tendency is in a certain way, as far as curiosity or your level of confidence or your tolerance for ambiguity. You might be able to deal with it, but if it's a heavy part of the work culture or job, are you going to be engaged over time? So personality traits can be measured with online assessments too very well, as long as they're valid and reliable. And then I mentioned earlier too, case study type assessments can be a really good format. They take a little bit longer to run, but they are very good as far as giving evidence for real-time decision-making, really good for leadership roles. Great.
Michelle, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, we see, I've seen in my portfolio of clients, really the realistic job simulations as part of the assessment that they look at to ensure that candidates, again, are thinking through logically how they get to those responses. And Priscilla, you touched on this. Really, there's the time constraints. They're graded from a behavioral standpoint. They're looking at, what is the actual end result of that assessment, and are we seeing that candidates are thinking critically? So that would be my additional add to that.
That's great. So I do have a question from Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. He asks, what are some common mistakes organizations make when trying to hire for AI-ready talent, and how can we avoid it? Anyone want to take that one on?
I think, and I can, and Priscilla, feel free to lean in on this, but I think from what I've seen is everybody is full in on AI, right? And that's all we hear day in and day out, which is great. But at the same time, we really need to take a step back and reflect on what is the true fundamental skills needed? Where are there gaps in the organization? And how do we plug in those gaps for the long term? And that, I think, is what the C-suite is expecting of us, right? When we come to the table and discuss that strategy with them, it's really looking at what are you going to need for the future So don't lend yourself to just somebody that might use AI for every single problem or need. They have to be selective and thoughtful on when they use it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, and one other thing too we've seen is that it's very tempting to want to eliminate certain positions entirely with AI, and what can often happen there, as far as like mistake goes, is certain populations that might be in roles that you might want to think about eliminating, maybe the entry level roles, for example, automate some of that that work. A lot of talent is built from the inside an organization. A lot of these early talent folks go from, being team leads to then people managers to then eventually strategic leaders, and they've been growing through the organization as they go. And so it's better in cases where you can to think about redesigning the job potentially to use AI for efficiency, but then let the human aspect work on, the judgment, the decision making, and then have that talent think about how AI can help them effectively use their jobs. So
that's great. So as always, we are running out of time. I can see some poll results, and the polls at the moment are saying mostly A, critical thinking. It's kind of like the biggest thing they're thinking about at the moment, and adaptability, which is B, is second. But we haven't got time to talk about that, because I do want you to very briefly leave us with a final thought, something practical, something obvious can kind of action immediately. Who'd like to go first?
I can go first, and just thinking this through, TA is in a really unique position where we are drivers of AI. We are using it. We're on the forefront of the tool. And the toolkit. So being able to bring that to directors and senior leadership and C-suite will be really important, because the strategy behind what's effective for us will resonate with them for their business needs.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and so I think as a final thought here too is, we're thinking about talent acquisition, making the right decisions about who's going to be the right fit for the role. Thinking long-term means fit to the role in a lot of different ways, and looking holistically at the person being matched not only to, what skills can they bring to the job, but what competencies do they bring that are going to be a good match to your organizational values. As I was talking earlier about personality and motivation, we see that the stronger those aspects are a good fit from the person to the demands of that job, the much more engaged they'll be, the longer they'll be retained. There's a lot of areas to look at for a person to be a good fit for the role, especially for the longer term. And that's a more holistic way to look at someone.
That's brilliant. Michelle, Priscilla, thank you both so much. You've given us plenty to think about. I hope you enjoy your break, and hope to see you both again in the new year. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We covered a lot today, as usual, running out of time. I can see the clock ticking. And if you'd like to stay across the latest thinking on leadership and talent, you can subscribe to This Week in Leadership. The link should be in the chat. If you hadn't had a chance, I'd really encourage you all to take a look at the full Talent Trends 2026 report. That link is in the chat also. Before we wrap up, a quick thank you to everyone who joined us today, and to those who've been with us across the year. Your time and engagement really mean a lot to us all here at Korn Ferry. And when I look back on this session, if today highlights anything, it's that as AI gets faster at producing answers, harder, the more important question is how well we're assessing the humans behind the decisions. Not what they know, not what tools they use, but how they think when there isn't a clear answer. So as you head toward the end of the year, start reflecting on the hires you've made and the ones you're about to make. It might be worth asking a slightly uncomfortable question. Is your hiring process keeping up with the world of work, just keeping you comfortable? Thanks again for joining us. Enjoy the break, recharge. We'll see you all in the new year. Goodbye.